a very experienced defense that might be one of the best in the Big Ten, a quarterback talent the likes that Nebraska fans may have never seen. You can understand why the Nebraska Cornhuskers are receiving the hype yet again this season in anticipation for 2024. To break it all down, Jon Johnston of Corn Nation joins me next to talk all things Big Red.
From LA to Piscataway, all Big Ten all year long. This is Big Ten 10.
Another summer and another gallon of hype, another gallon of optimism, another gallon of Kool-Aid. To talk all things 2024 Nebraska Cornhuskers football, we welcome in Mr. Positivity, Jon Johnston from Corn Nation, cornnation.com, the Corn Nation, world-famous Corn Nation YouTube channel as well, here talking all things Nebraska. The optimism, the Kool-Aid is present every single summer. This is going to be the year that the Nebraska Cornhuskers get to bowl eligibility. Maybe they get beyond bowl eligibility as well in Huskerland. Is there anything different? What's different about the optimism surrounding the 2024 Huskers?
Well, you're a gallon of Kool-Aid, more like a tanker truck. Come on, man. You know, maybe a sea of Kool-Aid. What's different about the optimism is, well, I think if you look at Nebraska's football team now, I mean, you just see a lot of talent across the board. Yeah. And you see that we actually have brought in one of the best quarterback recruits in the nation. Obviously, he hasn't stepped on a college football field, but if he's half of what he's advertised to be, then that takes care of a big, huge part of the problem in the last year under Matt Rule, the first year, that we sucked when we did suck. You know, on offense, we sucked anyway.
And let's start on the offensive side of the football when we start to break this football team down. Last season, it was injuries, it was turnovers, and safe to say, the offense that you saw was not what Marcus Satterfield certainly wanted to put on the field schematically. So in a perfect world, Dylan Raiola is the quarterback, right? He's healthy, and all of the other pieces to the puzzle are in place. What does a Marcus Satterfield offense look like in a perfect world for Nebraska, assuming everybody's healthy this season?
I think that we're going to be a lot more wing zingy than we've been before. And, you know, that guy we fired a little while back did us a huge favor in the fact that he got rid of this whole, it has to be a Nebraska guy running the Nebraska program thing. In some ways, you know, maybe we had to go through all the crap we went through to get to this point where we can just have a coach and they can bring in their own offense. And I sell shirts that say run RTFB, you know, run the fine ball. And I'm thinking that this year we're going to hear less of that just because I think it's going to be a much more balanced offense. I don't think it has to be explosive. The offense doesn't have to be out of the world. They just have to score. Okay, 2023 Nebraska is 123rd in scoring. 123rd. If they make a jump to 50th, that puts them at around 30 points a game. And that means they're going to win the vast majority of the games, given that the defense can maintain the level of play that they did last year.
Of course, we would be burying the lead when we talk about our position breakdowns if we didn't talk about Mr. Five-Star, Mr. Nebraska, Dylan Raiola. To me, at least in the Big Ten era, I'll certainly say this. He's the most talented quarterback to ever play for Nebraska, and he hasn't even played for Nebraska quite yet. What is this going to do for this Nebraska offense, having a bona fide five-star type of arm talent like Dylan? When you look at the previous Nebraska quarterbacks, you look at Adrian and Taylor Martinez, you look at the Tommy Armstrongs, you kind of look at some of these other guys. Dylan Raiola, to me, is at least leaps and bounds ahead of them passing. That's got to do something to make this offense even more explosive.
Well, he's also, I think a guy like that attracts players around him too. And I think what you're seeing for Nebraska is they've pulled in they had some offensive talent from before. And now they're starting to pull in some more offensive talent. All through the 80s and up until the 90s, Tom Osborne was so close to winning so many national titles, and probably the one thing he lacked out of all those seasons was a quarterback that could take him over the top, and that was Tommy Frazier when he finally came along, and then Scott Frost in 1997, and maybe Dylan Raiola could be. I'm not saying we're going to win national titles yet, but maybe Dylan Raiola can be a guy that is going to be that boost, to take the next step, so that we can get back to our former greatness that we truly deserve, our birthright, God-given, blah, 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 chosen people.
We wouldn't be doing a Nebraska football preview if we didn't hear that. So I love to hear that this early in the preview. Now, we talk about being a complete offense, and I think that also means a balanced offense. When Matt Rule was hired at his press conference, he says, we want to be a Big Ten football team. We want to be a physical football team. We want to run the football. And when you look at this running back room, there are 3 really good options for Nebraska to be a really good team on the ground. If Gabe Irvin Jr. can stay healthy, I think he is a really good option. Emmett Johnson, right? When some of these running backs started to go down last year, Emmett Johnson certainly stepped up. How about Dante Dowdell coming over from Oregon? He was the guy that really shined in that spring game. Who stands out to you as maybe the running back that could take over this running back room when all is said and done in 2024?
Well, I think it's going to be Emmett Johnson. I think he has the all-around. He can catch, he can run, he can, he's not big enough to be the bruiser guy, but he's not small enough to be like a scat back type guy where you're just going to put him out in space. I think he's pretty versatile. The balance part, I think, is going to be key. Last year, what did you do? What did everybody do with Nebraska last year? We couldn't throw the ball. Nobody could throw the ball. And most of the time we threw the ball to the other team. So you just load up the box. Well, with the balance and Fedoni, Banks, Jalen Lloyd, stuff like that, that's where the key is to get the balance going so that they have to play honest defense and they can't just mash everybody up there and stop the run. So.
And the balance, once again, we went to the quarterback, we went to the run game. Now we're going to kind of go back to these pass catchers on the outside. Look, when you look at Nebraska, I don't think that they're going to be any sort of explosive right on the perimeter when you kind of compare them to maybe some of the top offenses in the Big Ten Conference. But there is a good amount of weapons on the outside. Of course, you got to start with the transfers. Jamal Banks, Isaiah Nair coming in. They're expected to kind of be towards the top of that depth chart to be playmakers in this offense. I love Jalen Lloyd. I love his track speed. I love his ability to just run, and Dylan Raiola with his huge arm to just chuck it deep and to be able to stretch the defense. I think that opens up the run lanes, right? We talk about so much more balance in this offense. How do you think the workload and the distribution of this wide receiver room is going to work? Who's really going to step up and maybe be those top playmakers?
Maybe it was a first year thing, but I think what you saw in Matt Rule's first year is he played a gob of guys. Yep. I mean, they played guys all over the place. And I know that, everybody likes to have, this is the guy, the receiver that we're going to talk about, and this is the guy that's going to get all the yardage. I can see them spreading this stuff out because I guess when I look at Marcus Satterfield's offense, what I expect is a lot of movement. I think, again, Jalen Lloyd is probably the guy. But in terms of receiving yardage, I think it's time for Thomas Fedoni to really have a good year. I can't. There was just something about a play he ran in the spring game where he sat down in the middle of the field and I think that the special connection is going to be between Raiola and Fedoni. Well, there you go. You know what I mean? Just like that Kelsey and that other guy's name that, I don't know, plays quarterback every once in a while.
That looks a lot like Dylan Raiola.
Yeah. Yeah. And they're like fans of each other or something. I don't know. I think that, between Fedoni and Jalen Lloyd, I think those are your 2 top receivers this year.
And then 2 guys that I didn't mention, Isaiah Garcia Castaneda. Everybody kind of remembers him early in the season, a couple of years back, getting that touchdown catch in the Northwestern game to kick off the season over there in Ireland. Malachi Coleman, right, from a local high school there at Lincoln East that a lot of people were excited about. Maybe didn't get on the field a ton last year, but John read the show notes because he's looking into my next point, talking about that tight end room because I think that this tight end room could maybe be one of the best duos or rooms in the Big Ten. Thomas Fidone is a big candidate to be the leading receiver. Like you mentioned, Nate Borkircher is in there as well to kind of fill out that room. How do you expect the tight end room to be used in there? We talk about that perfect world scenario with Marcus Satterfield without all the injuries and the turnovers. What's that perfect world scenario where these tight ends are being used? How are they being used in this offense?
My perfect world for the tight ends being used in this offense is to be completely forgotten. And then they just show up with a ball 20 yards downfield or in the middle of a field, and they suddenly have the ball 12 yards downfield. And that's what I would like. I would like to see them, you said perfect world. I would like to see where the defenses start worrying about the receivers enough or the run game enough that the tight end becomes kind of a guy who pretends he's blocking and does stuff, and then he's just moving and getting the receptions that move chains. I mean, let's face it. Again, I go back to that 123rd in scoring thing. Keeping the chains moving, keep them moving down the field, giving the ball to the other team. Have to bring that up again. But, I think the tight ends are going to play a huge part of that. And Borkircher is I think he's just a working guy. You know what I mean? I don't think he's a guy that has the greatest talent in the world, but I think he's a guy who knows what he's doing on the field, knows how to get open, knows, his blocking is paramount to the success of the offense. And I think he could be fun. And then you got, I don't expect a lot from Carter Nelson coming in. What was he, like the top tight end recruit in the nation or something?
Yeah, one of them.
And I guess I don't expect a lot from him in this first year, just because there's so many other options. What the old phrase is, what is it? Get old, stay old.
Yep.
So I hope that, some of these guys have time to develop rather than just being thrown on the field. On the other hand, Matt Rule loves to play a lot of guys, so we'll see what happens.
And that experience, that's something we're going to be talking about here in defense in a little bit. There's a lot of experience in a lot of positions for the Nebraska Cornhuskers tight end with those two guys. And Thomas Fidone, man, he went through some injuries earlier in his career. It'd be great to really see him have an outstanding season in this offense. So, offensive line. When you look at this offense the last couple of years, they've been banged up. There's been a lot of guys in different spots, and maybe it exactly hasn't been the strength of this offense. But when you look at what's coming back for the Nebraska Cornhuskers this season, there's a lot of experience. There's a lot of players who have played a lot of time in college football. When you look at returning two honorable mention All Big Ten guys, center Ben Scott, right tackle Bryce Benhart, Micah Mazuka coming in. He's transferring in. He's played Power 4 football at both Baylor and Florida, and there's others on this offensive line, the Turner Corcorans and others of the world that have been banged up and kind of moved around into different spots. If healthy, is this finally the experienced strength of this team? Is this a strength that Nebraska can lean on?
I don't know. I wouldn't go so far as to say they're a strength yet. But I think when you look at them compared to where they were 2 years ago, 2 years ago they were 2 years ago they were an embarrassment. 2 years ago they were completely non-functional. 2 years ago all they had to do was run a twist and the whole offensive line's brains exploded straight out of their helmets, and they couldn't block. Well, they couldn't block your mother. There you go. They just honestly didn't exist as a unit. And then last year, you saw that they actually were starting to play a lot better. Bryce Benhart is a guy I have sworn a lot at, and I've sworn a lot at him in videos on YouTube. And he has come now. He could have possibly left last year to become an NFL draft pick. And I think that, if people look at it and say, well, they haven't developed anybody. Well, Bryce Benhart has come a long ways from where he was before. I don't think they're quite strength level yet. We're going to find that out this year, but they are building depth. And that really goes back to the part about get old and stay old is getting older guys and experienced guys in your first set on the line, and then find some people that you can rotate in there and starting getting them experience too. They're going to be better. And that's, for Nebraska fans, the offensive line is its own religion. You know what I mean? We love our offensive linemen probably but as much as anybody has in football, and we haven't won an Outland or a Lombardi or whatever the hell, a Remington, we had pro trophy named after our own guy. And I couldn't tell you who the last Nebraskan was to name that back in 1875, probably, it seems like. But, that part, we're not there yet, but we are getting to be much closer than we were before.
Certainly improvements, certainly steps, and Matt Rule and company wants to be stout up front on that offensive line. Let's switch over to the defensive side of the football. We talked about positivity at the beginning of the show. This is where things are about to get real positive because are the black shirts back on defense? Tony White came in year number 1, and he flipped the script. This was one of the top defenses in the Big Ten. This was one of the top defenses in all of college football. What impressed you most about the turnaround for Tony White's and Nebraska's defense last season?
Well, they played defense. Now, that's just cheesy. You know what? They flew to the ball. They looked like a team that wanted to go after people and just destroy them. They looked like they could be black shirts again. And for a while, they didn't look anything like that. They looked like guys that were waiting for things to happen to them. And last year, they looked like they were going to go take it to people, and they largely did. Unfortunately, they had an offense that turned the ball over all the time. I got to bring that up again. But they're exciting to watch and they're fun to watch. And they have some players that are, very talented. And let's see, the guys on the defensive line is probably the biggest. If I had to pick one shock about last season, it would have been the play of the defensive line with Ty Robinson and the Polar Bear and, Cameron Lenhart, some of those guys that really, you thought they were going to be a weakness, and they weren't a weakness at all. They were very, very good. And, like Ty Robinson would take over, they'd have to double team him, and that always frees up another player to make a play. So
when I look at this defense, I see experience all over. I see fourth-year guys. I see fifth-year guys. And when I look at the Big Ten, and for teams that I look to that I think are going to be successful, win 8, 9, 10 games, I look at experience. Like, look what Michigan has been able to do with some of their experienced players over the last couple of years. How important is that experience to having guys that have been around this system? I know Tony White, it was his first year last year, but guys that have been around Nebraska for a long time. How important is that to be able to have that experience on this defense?
Well, defense, like anything, sports now for football is, you might as well be studying quantum mechanics sometimes, with the way that they set up stuff, with the way that offenses move and the reads you have to make and stuff like that. So, getting a year under their belt in Tony White's first season, I think that you not only get better because you know what you're doing, you get better because you have a lot more confidence. And it was, when you looked at the game book last year, the game book's the official listing of what happened to the game. And I always looked at participation, and he did play like 26 people on defense in a lot of those games. So he had a lot of guys moving in and out in order to build that experience, way ahead of time. And I think the thing is when he was doing that, they didn't really, they might, they didn't win enough games to get to a bowl game, but they didn't fall apart. You know what I mean? They had guys come in that weren't that experienced. They weren't the best players. They weren't the first team guys. And they still a lot of times did their job. Where previously under the previous coaching regimes, you had guys that would constantly think, that guy's not doing his job, so I have to do it for him. And of course, he's out of position. Then big plays happen. And then you're embarrassed. And you didn't see a whole lot of that last year. In fact, I didn't look this up, but I think Nebraska was one of the best teams in the nation at not giving up any big plays whatsoever. And that is huge, because offenses want to have explosive plays. That's one of their goals. And if you can, kill that, if you can stop that on defense, it gives your offense a hell of a lot more confidence, and your defense, but it gives your offense a lot more confidence that they don't have to just go out and make up for a huge mistake that you just made on the field. So I think, the defense is exciting. Finally.
I know. It's great to have that energy back in Lincoln, Nebraska, when you look at the defensive side of the football and when you look at that experience. And now you got to think jumping, like what they were able to do in year one under Tony White, and now you get a spring underneath you. You get, all these winter workouts, summer workouts, and all of a complete offseason. You got to think what's only going to happen maybe in year number 2. Maybe I'm drinking the Kool-Aid a little bit on the defensive side of the football. Let's talk about position groups. Let's first talk about that defensive line. Ty Robinson, it seems like he's been wearing that N on the side of the helmet forever. You look at an all Big Ten name team and Nash Hutmacher. Man, if there was a name for a Big Ten defensive tackle, that is it. He's one of my favorite players. I love, being on the wrestling team and all that the Polar Bear is a part of that. Jamari Butler is also on the defensive line. Cameron Lenhart as well. And there's a lot of flexibility on this defense. So there might be some players that I might name on the defensive line that might kind of shift back to an outside linebacker and vice versa, which I kind of like as well in this Tony White defense. But what excites you most about the defensive front and the defensive line?
Well, that they can play Big Ten football. I mean, they played Big Ten football very well last year. And, the Big Ten, you have to be physical. Yep. I know that, it's not the 3 yards in a cloud of dust that we all, kind of bring up. If you're an older guy like me, maybe you don't, but they are physical, and that's kind of the key. And that, like I said earlier, that was what we first worried about when we saw we're going to run a 3-3-5 that would never work in the Big Ten. And Ty Robinson and I call him the nut masher myself. But those two guys are just they're just anchors on the defensive line, and they make the defensive go. They do. If you don't have a defensive line, maybe you can get away with that in, I don't know, the group of 5, MAC football, but not in the Big Ten. People are just going to recognize that and run the ball down your throats. And that is one thing about Nebraska now, is that we have the guys up front to stop that in before it gets started.
Yeah, you certainly need that front to be able to go against these really good offensive lines on the other side in the Big Ten Conference as well. Let's talk about this Nebraska secondary before we get to the linebackers. This was a Nebraska defensive backfield that allowed the second least passing yards per game in the Big Ten last season. They returned almost the whole group. You look at Isaac Gifford coming back. You look at Tommy Hill coming back. You look at Malcolm Hartzog. You look at some of these players. The depth is being celebrated by a lot of people. How deep can this Nebraska secondary really go?
I think if you pick the place where there was a weakness, it might be the secondary. Just because we have to pick a weakness is what we do. But I think Bly Hill was injured in the spring game, and I think he'll make it back by fall. But Tommy Hill was a player that you could tell that he wanted to make plays over the past, since he's been at Nebraska, and he's tried to make some big plays, and then he's screwed up on those. He was a guy I think is so athletic. It's going to be interesting to see what he does this year because of the athleticism, and he does have like big play capability.
This linebacker group is very interesting. You've got Javen Wright coming back, who was second on the team in tackles last season. You've got John Bullock, who was fourth on the team in tackles last season. Those are the returning as experienced guys. But then you got the Princewell Uman Mielens, you've got the MJ Shermans, you've got some of these other guys, maybe younger guys in this group and other versatile players as well. How do you see them kind of gelling together in the middle of this defense?
I think we have players. I'm not that worried about them. I mean, they performed so well last year that the defense is going to be really good again this year.
Let's head to the schedule, and that's what everybody's kind of looking at when you look at the optimism for the Nebraska Cornhuskers this season. This early season schedule, very manageable. You could really get out to a strong record early on, especially a big Colorado showdown in week number 2 under the lights. Big Ten Saturday night, man. How important is it to getting off the schneid against Deion Sanders, Shadur Sanders, Shiloh Sanders? Maybe there's a dog Sanders and the rest of the Colorado Buffaloes.
Well, let's just say Nebraska. I don't think Nebraska can lose this game. You always want to look at it and say, would this break the heart of the team? I think it would hurt a lot. But on the other hand, when I look at Colorado versus where we're going, I don't really see any way Nebraska can lose this game. And this is probably the problem with Nebraska fan is, we still, over the years, turned the ball over and made mistakes. And that's really the hump we have to get over. And if we get over that hump, we got UTEP first.
Yep.
Which is nice because we don't go on the road to play a Big Ten opponent right to start the season 2024. It's a nice change. And then you get Colorado, and the hype is going to be massive. And everybody is going to be watching that game. And to be honest with you, I think we're just going to smash Colorado into the ground. I think there's a lot of stuff from last year, the whole it's personal and you stood on the logo and we hate those people anyway. I'm trying to be nice and family friendly, but I just think that there's going to be a lot of pent up, beat the holy hell out of them, crush them into the ground to show them who we are. And I just don't see any way that doesn't happen this year.
And that Colorado game you mentioned, how much that could swing. You got to imagine that there's going to be some built-up frustration how last year kind of went, because early in that game, Nebraska was establishing some things at the line of scrimmage, and they were physical. And, of course, the turnovers went the other way as well. Now, down the stretch, things get a little bit more difficult. Ohio State and USC, and then rivals Wisconsin and Iowa. This is the question everybody wants to know, right? I should have brought my Kool-Aid for this very question. What's the ceiling for Nebraska? What are the expectations when all is said and done?
Well, those are two different things. I think the ceiling is 10-2. And the reason why I said, put it this way, you can go into your year and you can go, oh, we shouldn't talk big because we haven't done well and stuff like that. But we have what looks like a very good football team coming into this season. So why not the ceiling be 10-2? I think our defense puts us into every game as long as, they have a lot of depth. And I mentioned before, they could just swap guys in. So you have a defense like that, you can be in every game. So why not 10-2? I don't think anybody except for, let's face it, Ohio State, Oregon in the Big Ten.
Yep.
Everybody else is kind of, those are your top two. And then everybody else, I think, is kind of mushy. Okay, there's some people that are not very good, but you got the two top teams, and then you got a bunch of people that are going to fight for that third and fourth position. And it's my thought that the top 4 teams probably will have the best chance to make it in the new college football playoff.
Yep.
So, who's going to be those top 4? Well, why can't it be Nebraska? Now, what's the expectation? I did say they're two different things. The ceiling for me is like, we're going to do this, in my most wild, optimistic moment. That's what I think. But I think that realistically, the expectation would be around 8 wins. I'm lying. It's 10-2, damn it. It's 10-2. It's 10-2.
I love it.
Kool-Aid. That's the Kool-Aid time of year, Chad.
For me, 8 wins expectations, 10 wins the ceiling. Jon Johnston says 10 wins. If I die, I die on that hill. Jon Johnston from Corn Nation joining us, talking all things Nebraska. I am fired up and ready to walk through that tunnel onto Memorial Stadium. It's going to be a great year. Excited to see the Nebraska Cornhuskers. Jon, thanks for joining me. It's always a pleasure. I'm sure we'll see you down the road.
Thank you for having me. And boy, the season can't get here fast enough.
Thanks for watching Big Ten Ted, where it's all Big Ten all year long. Make sure to like the video to spread the word of Big Ten Ted to the masses, and subscribe to the channel for updates on Big Ten content that drops every day.